You're listening to the Skelton Report. We dig deep into the issues of mental health, psychology, empowerment, and self-improvement. Thanks for listening to the show. Here's your host, Mark Nathaniel Skelton.
This is the Skelton Report, where we discuss mental health, self-help, and all things psychology. Today we're going to be discussing internalized racism. But before we get started, I wanted to give you a warm welcome. If you are joining us for the first time, you are our honored guest. And if you are returning, we definitely appreciate the love. Also, it's always good to check in with you, make sure all is well your way. Hope you're having a blessed day and tuning in and all is well around you. I have two good updates. I did secure an internship, so God is good with that. And my dissertation project was approved. Again, that's titled, "What Role Does Theology Play in COVID-19 Vaccine Decision-Making Within African American Communities?" And so I will be doing focus groups with a number of churches in the local area to discover what the answer is to that. So I'll definitely keep you updated. And this is great news because I got about one more year, Lord's willing, on the road to becoming a clinical psychologist. So I appreciate the love and the support along the journey. All right, so let's go ahead and transition into today's topic, which is titled Understanding and Overcoming Internalized Racism in the Black Community. All right, so by way of introduction, internalized racism refers to the internalization of negative beliefs, stereotypes, and attitudes about one's own racial group. It is a common phenomenon among people of color who've been subjected to racism and discrimination. In this podcast episode, we will explore the concept of internalized racism in the Black and African American community, drawing from psychoanalysis theory and the perspective of Black psychologists such as Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Cress Welsing, and Dr. Frantz Fanon. We will examine the mechanisms of internalized racism and its negative impacts on the daily lives of Black individuals. Finally, we will explore recommendations from theorists on how to work through and heal from internalized racism. So, as background to the concept, psychoanalysis theory posits that humans have a natural tendency to defend themselves against negative emotions and feelings by employing defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are unconscious strategies used to protect the individual from anxiety and discomfort. And so they're positing that in the context of internalized racism, defense mechanisms can be used to cope with a negative message and belief about one's own racial group. So specifically with internalization of racism, internalized racism is a process by which individuals come to accept negative beliefs and stereotypes about their own racial group. This process is often unconscious and can lead to a fragmented sense of self, a lack of self-esteem, and a disconnection from one's own cultural heritage. Internalized racism can manifest in different ways, such as colorism, self-hatred, and negative attitudes towards other members of one's own racial group. So, what are the negative impacts of internalized racism? Internalized racism can have numerous negative impacts on the daily lives of Black individuals. It can lead to mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. It can also impact social relationships, leading to mistrust and a lack of support within the Black community. In addition, internalized racism can impact professional and educational opportunities, as Black individuals may internalize messages of inferiority and lack of capability. Internalized racism is a form of oppression that operates within individuals and is deeply rooted in the larger system of racism. It is a process by which individuals from marginalized groups internalize negative messages and stereotypes about their own race or ethnicity, which can lead to a sense of inferiority, self-hatred, and low self-esteem. Internalized racism can manifest in a variety of ways, including 1. Negative self-image. Internalized racism can lead to negative self-image and low self-esteem, which can affect how individuals view themselves and their potential. This can lead to a sense of hopelessness, self-doubt, and feelings of worthlessness. 2, prejudice towards other marginalized groups. Internalized racism can also lead individuals to hold negative attitudes towards other marginalized groups, particularly those that are perceived as being lower in the social hierarchy. 3, black on black violence. Dr. Amos Wilson believed that internalized racism is a root cause of black on black violence. Internalized racism can lead to feelings of anger, resentment, and aggression towards other black individuals, particularly those who are perceived as being more successful or less black. This can create a cycle of violence and perpetuate negative stereotypes about the black community. And 4, colorism. Internalized racism can also manifest in colorism, which is the belief that lighter-skinned individuals are superior to darker-skinned individuals. This can lead to discrimination and marginalization within the black community itself. It is important to note that internalized racism operates at a subconscious level, and many black and African American individuals may not even be aware that they are operating under its influence. For example, internalized racism can lead to a preference for Eurocentric beauty standards and the belief that speaking in proper English is more prestigious than speaking in the African American vernacular English, AAVE. To overcome internalized racism, it is important for individuals to engage in self-reflection, education, and self-care. This may involve exploring one's own biases and attitudes, seeking out positive role models, and building supportive communities. It's also important to challenge oppressive systems and advocate for policies that promote equality and justice. So let's take a look at internalized racism from the perspective of black psychologists. Dr. Amos Wilson, Dr. Cress Welsing, and Dr. Frantz Fanon are 3 prominent black psychologists and psychiatrists who have contributed to the understanding of internalized racism. Dr. Wilson emphasized the need for black individuals to develop a strong sense of self and to reclaim their cultural heritage in order to combat internalized racism. Dr. Welsing focused on the impact of racism on the psyche and the need to understand the mechanisms of racism in order to work through it. Dr. Fanon explored the psychological effects of racism and colonialism on the black psyche, arguing that the process of decolonization was necessary to overcome internalized racism. Let's begin with Dr. Amos Wilson. Dr. Amos Wilson was a black psychologist and author who was born in Mississippi in 1941 and passed in 1995. He earned a bachelor's degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta and a master's degree in social work from Atlanta University. He also earned a PhD in psychology from the New School for Social Research in New York. Wilson was a prominent advocate for the advancement of the black community and is known for his work on black psychology and the analysis of racism. He wrote several books, including The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child and Black on Black Violence, The Psychodynamic of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. Dr. Wilson viewed internalized racism as a direct result of the systemic oppression and racism experienced by the Black community. He believed that internalized racism was a defense mechanism used by Black individuals to cope with the stress of racism and white supremacy. In his work, he emphasized the need for Black individuals to recognize and acknowledge their internalized racism in order to address it and move towards healing. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing was a Black psychiatrist and author who was born in Chicago in 1935 and passed in 2016. She earned a bachelor's degree from Antioch College in Ohio and a medical degree from Howard University. She is best known for her book, The ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors, in which she discussed the impact of white supremacy on global community and the psychological impact of racism on Black individuals. Welsing viewed internalized racism as a product of the psychological conditioning of Black community by white supremacy. She believed that the self-hatred and division within the Black community were a result of internalized racism and a lack of understanding of the true nature of white supremacy. In her work, she emphasized the need for Black individuals to recognize the influence of white supremacy and to work towards building a strong sense of Black identity and pride. And last but not least is Dr. Frantz Fanon. Dr. Frantz Fanon was a Black psychiatrist and author who was born in Martinique in 1925 and passed away in 1961. He is best known for his works including Black Skin, White Mask, and The Wretched of the Earth, in which he analyzed the psychological effects of colonialism and racism on Black individuals and societies. Fanon viewed internalized racism as a manifestation of the colonial mindset imposed on the Black community by white supremacy. He believed that internalized racism was a result of the division between the colonizer and the colonized, and the belief in the inferiority of the colonized. In his work, he emphasized the need for colonized to reject the ideology and culture of the colonizer and to work towards decolonization and the restoration of their dignity and humanity. So here are some recommendations for overcoming internalized racism. To overcome internalized racism, it is necessary to develop a strong sense of self and to challenge negative beliefs and stereotypes about one's own racial group. This can be done through therapy, education, and community support. It is also important to develop a sense of pride in one's cultural heritage and to connect with other members of the Black community. Finally, it is important to recognize that the process of healing from internalized racism is ongoing and requires continuous work and self-reflection. So we'll end on 5 tips on how to counter internalized racism. Overcoming internalized racism is a complex and ongoing process that requires an individual's willingness to confront and unlearn deeply ingrained beliefs and behaviors. Here are some recommendations from various scholars and theorists on how to work through and heal from internalized racism. Number 1, education awareness. Education and awareness of the historical and social factors that contribute to internalized racism are essential in combating it. This includes learning about the effects of racism, understanding the differences between prejudice, discrimination, and systemic racism, and being able to identify and confront internalized beliefs and behaviors. Number 2, positive self-affirmation. Positive self-affirmation involves developing a positive self-image and building self-esteem. This can be done through engaging in activities that bring joy and fulfillment, surrounding oneself with positive and supportive people, and recognizing and celebrating one's accomplishments. Number 3, seeking therapy or counseling. Working with a therapist or counselor can help individuals process and address their experiences with racism, explore their emotions and feelings, and develop coping strategies to deal with the effects of internalized racism. And number 4, building a supportive community. Building a supportive community involves surrounding oneself with like-minded individuals who share similar experiences and can provide encouragement and support. This can be done through joining support groups or organizations that promote racial equality and social justice. And number 5, challenging oppressive systems. To combat internalized racism, it is necessary to challenge oppressive systems and advocate for change. This includes speaking out against racism, promoting diversity and inclusion, and advocating for policies and practices that promote equity and justice. It is important to note that these are just some of the many ways to overcome internalized racism, and the process will be unique to each individual's experience and needs. All right, that's all I have. I hope this information was a blessing for you as it was for me in understanding some of the background and just one take on how racism impacts us on a community as well as an individual level. Again, working from more of a psychodynamic interpretation, as well as seeing it through the lens of Black professionals and leaders and what some of the literature is saying on the topic. Well, again, hope it was a blessing for you as it was for me. Be sure to follow me at Mark N. Skelton for this content and more like it. And I will put the references for today's topic in the description below. That's all I got. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. And I will catch you on the next go around. Peace.